In the sweltering summer of 1945, tens of thousands of eyes scanned the skies above Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Strange leaflets fluttered down, warning of a weapon unlike any the world had seen, a new bomb. For Japanese civilians, the words sparked disbelief, fear, and rumors. Could an enemy truly possess the power to destroy entire cities in a single strike? In that fragile silence, decisions were made, lives trembled, and the unimaginable edged closer. A quiet warning before history was forever rewritten. By mid-1945, Japan was a nation suspended between endurance and exhaustion. In cities like Tokyo, Osaka, and Nagoya, the once bustling streets were now scarred by the relentless rhythm of war. Buildings blackened by firebombs jutted into the sky like jagged teeth, their skeletal frames a reminder of nights spent under incendiary storms. Electricity was intermittent, transportation sporadic, and food, already scarce, had become a daily negotiation between hope and survival. Families huddled in the shadows of shattered homes, the hum of air raid sirens a nightly lullaby. In the smaller cities, the contrast was equally stark. Children played in streets littered with rubble, their laughter fragile against the backdrop of distant bombings. Mothers, worn and watchful, moved through ration lines, clutching small bundles of rice and sweet potatoes, while fathers, recently returned from the front, carried invisible burdens, both memories of battle and the uncertainty of what lay ahead. The war had made its home inside every apartment and alleyway, shaping rhythms of life around curfews, shortages, and whispered conversations about what the next day might bring. Amid this backdrop, the skies carried a new form of warning. From the thin aluminum of U.S. aircraft leaflets fluttered over Hiroshima, Kokura, and Nagasaki, messages urging surrender before disaster struck. The leaflets, stark and unreadable to some, were dropped with mechanical precision, their content a mix of caution and psychological pressure. Civilians, exhausted and numbed, received them with disbelief. Rumors circulated in crowded markets and quiet homes of a new weapon, a force so terrible it could flatten entire cities in an instant. Yet for many, these warnings seemed like distant threats, propaganda meant to frighten, exaggeration meant to manipulate. In homes across the islands, children asked questions their parents could not answer. Soldiers turned citizens moved silently through bombed streets, eyes scanning the sky for shadows that promised nothing good. Night after night, families pressed themselves against walls, praying the distant thunder of air raids would not come closer. And yet, despite exhaustion and fear, life continued in fragile loops of survival. On a quiet evening in Hiroshima, as the sun dipped behind a horizon scarred with smoke and skeletal rooftops, a single leaflet drifted lazily to the ground. It landed unnoticed, a silent herald of a danger too abstract to confront. Above, the city exhaled in uneasy calm, the shadows deepening, the air heavy with an unspoken tension, an omen carried on the wind, waiting to be realized. In the late spring of 1945, the skies above Hiroshima, Kokura, and Nagasaki carried a new kind of terror, silent, paper-thin, yet heavy with warning. Thousands of leaflets, printed in English and translated into Japanese, rained down from American B-29 bombers. They were stark in design, black text on pale paper, outlining in precise terms the consequences of continued resistance. They spoke of prompt and utter destruction for cities that refused to surrender, offering a single path to safety: unconditional capitulation. For civilians, the leaflets were both incomprehensible and unsettling. Families gathered on streets, in courtyards, and under temporary shelters, reading and rereading the words. Some read aloud, hesitant and trembling, as if vocalizing them could make the threat more tangible. Office clerks, mothers, and students alike paused mid-task, paper in hand, eyes scanning for signs of immediate danger. One mother pressed her children close, tracing the words with her finger, unsure if these warnings were meant to protect or terrorize. In another home, an elderly man shook his head slowly, muttering that such destruction could not possibly exist, that the leaflets were yet another form of propaganda in a world already steeped in rumors of horrors. The reactions were as varied as the cities themselves. In neighborhoods already scarred by conventional bombing, the warnings were met with a mix of skepticism and resigned fear. Citizens who had survived firebomb raids, who had walked through streets of ash and soot, found it difficult to imagine a weapon capable of leveling an entire city in an instant. For some, there was a faint glimmer of hope in the instructions. Surrender could save lives. Yet hope was tempered by disbelief, and disbelief by the stark reality of what had already been endured. The leaflets fell like rain over a population unprepared to grasp their significance. Their words seeped into conversations, drifting from kitchens to shrines, into marketplaces and crowded train stations. Neighbors whispered, "It could destroy the whole city at once," the abstract threat taking root in the fertile soil of wartime anxiety. Children asked questions their parents could not answer. Adults debated the veracity of the claims, balancing fear against the instinct to deny what was too horrifying to accept. And as the paper drifted across rooftops and empty lots, the warnings became more than text. They became a presence. A shadow over every street, a pause in every heartbeat, a quiet, insistent tension threading through daily life. The world had already proven capable of unimaginable destruction, and now the promise of something far worse hung, almost tangibly, above the city. In that delicate twilight, as leaflets settled onto tatami mats and cracked asphalt, civilians faced a new, unspoken question. Could humanity survive this next chapter of war? By the summer of 1945, the war had moved beyond conventional battles, beyond the trenches and cities of fire. Above Japan, an invisible campaign unfolded, one fought not with guns and bombs, but with information, observation, and the careful manipulation of fear. The United States, preparing for an attack unprecedented in scale and consequence, deployed psychological operations with meticulous precision. Leaflets had been only the first step. Air reconnaissance, coded reports, and carefully calculated flight paths formed the backbone of an operation designed to erode morale even before the first bomb fell. B-29 superfortresses, the largest bombers of the era, traced arcs across the skies at altitudes above 10,000 feet, following routes that had been painstakingly charted to minimize risk and maximize observation. From June through early August, thousands of leaflets, estimates suggest over 6 million, were dropped across Hiroshima, Kokura, and Nagasaki, reaching tens of thousands of civilians. Pilots would glance down through gun ports and observation windows, noting clusters of people gathering in streets and courtyards, holding the pale sheets in their hands, reading aloud, or hesitating as if unsure what to make of them. In those moments, the abstract terror of the atomic threat became tangible, a visible pulse beneath the cloudless skies. On the ground, Japanese authorities faced an impossible task. Local officials attempted to reassure the population, dismissing the leaflets as exaggeration, issuing official statements meant to maintain calm. Newspapers, tightly controlled yet increasingly strained by the reality of bombings and shortages, carried thin threads of information, careful not to incite panic. Radio broadcasts repeated warnings about conventional air raids, emphasizing preparedness and endurance, while carefully avoiding the details of what might truly be coming. Yet, even with official denial, rumors spread with relentless speed. Word of mouth, whispered conversations, and the occasional broadcast from Allied sources painted a picture of a weapon capable of leveling entire cities in a single instant. The tension among civilians grew steadily, a quiet undercurrent beneath daily life. Mothers clutched children while standing in line for rationed food. Factory workers paused in their work, eyes scanning the sky for any unusual shadow. Elderly men and women muttered to neighbors about the incomprehensible nature of the threat, caught between disbelief and a gnawing unease. Even for those familiar with the devastation of firebombing raids, The notion of a weapon that could render entire districts ash in seconds seemed almost impossible to grasp. By late July, as August loomed on the horizon, the invisible war had reached its apex. Fear and skepticism coexisted uneasily in every city street and rural village. Civilians braced for air raids, stacking sandbags, seeking shelter, and listening intently for sirens that might signal the familiar pattern of destruction. Yet none could anticipate the scale or nature of what awaited them. The war they had endured, brutal and relentless, had prepared them for fire and ruin, but nothing could prepare them for the shadow of an entirely new kind of annihilation, poised to descend silently from the skies. In the sweltering summer of 1945, life in Hiroshima and Nagasaki moved forward in a fragile rhythm, as if the city itself were holding its breath. Streets bustled with the quiet hum of everyday existence, women carrying baskets of vegetables from the markets, factory workers maintaining assembly lines under the watchful eyes of supervisors, children weaving through alleys, their laughter ringing fragile against the distant echo of past bombings. Yet beneath this surface, an undercurrent of tension threaded every step, every glance upward toward the pale blue sky. Families debated quietly in their homes, weighing impossible choices. Some considered leaving the city, seeking refuge in the countryside or in the temporary shelters that had become part of wartime routines. Others, fatigued by months of air raids and shortages, chose to remain, convinced that the newest warnings, leaflets speaking of a weapon that could destroy an entire city at once, were exaggeration. Mothers pressed children close, murmuring reassurances that they barely believed themselves, while fathers paced silently, torn between resignation and the faint hope that survival was possible if the right precautions were taken. The psychological conflict was profound. Disbelief wrestled with instinctive fear. Even in neighborhoods devastated by conventional bombings, the very notion of total annihilation seemed unreal. People sought shelter in basements and under stairwells, yet returned to daily tasks, carrying water, preparing meals, and tending to the routines that lent life a semblance of normalcy. Children continued to play in open courtyards, their games punctuated by the occasional siren, a reminder that danger was always at the doorstep. Ordinary resilience became a paradox, a human instinct to maintain dignity and continuity even as the unimaginable loomed. Diaries and letters from the period reveal this tension in stark detail. One post-war interview recounts a family gathered around a flickering lamp, debating whether to flee, the father insisting the warnings were propaganda while the mother quietly prayed. Another describes a factory worker continuing to operate machinery even as leaflets fluttered onto the roof, gripping the paper with numb fascination. In all accounts, there is a surreal calm, punctuated by sudden flashes of dread, moments when reality intruded and the abstract threat became almost tangible. As August approached, the city pulsed with this uneasy rhythm. Civilians speculated, debated, and prepared, unaware that hours away, men in uniform were executing the final movements of a mission that would change the world. The dramatic irony of these moments is profound. Streets alive with the ordinary, hearts heavy with anxiety, yet blind to the scale of the catastrophe about to descend. The air carried a quiet tension, as if the city itself knew the balance between survival and annihilation was about to be tested in ways humanity had never imagined. In the aftermath of August 6 and August 9, 1945, Hiroshima and Nagasaki were transformed in ways that words struggle to capture. Entire neighborhoods were reduced to ash, streets unrecognizable, and tens of thousands of lives extinguished in a matter of seconds. Yet scattered among the rubble, the leaflets that had warned of such destruction remained, pale fragments of paper, fluttering quietly against blackened beams and twisted metal. They had spoken of prompt and utter destruction, but for most, the abstract warnings had been nearly incomprehensible. Could the knowledge of what was coming have altered fate, Or was the scale of devastation simply beyond the grasp of human imagination? Survivors recall the eerie dissonance, the fragility of life, the randomness of survival, and the haunting presence of warning too late understood. Diaries and letters from those who lived through the bombing speak not only of shock and grief, but of an acute moral reflection. Why had the world possessed such a weapon, and could anything have prevented its impact? The leaflets, intended as a lifeline, became symbols of both hope and failure, a paradox of forewarning rendered tragically insufficient. The psychological legacy of the atomic bombings extended far beyond immediate destruction. Fear and trauma penetrated families and communities, shaping post-war narratives of guilt, responsibility, and survival. Historians, military strategists, and civilians alike have debated the efficacy of the leaflets, the morality of the bombings, and the questions they raised about the intersection of humanity and technology. The warning was clear, yet its power to save was limited by disbelief, the rapidity of execution, and the unprecedented scale of the weapon itself. Atomic warfare altered the very calculus of conflict, making the act of warning both necessary and tragically inadequate. The leaflet, a simple piece of paper, becomes emblematic, a tangible attempt to preserve life amid a mechanism of annihilation, the likes of which the world had never seen. It drifts across landscapes scarred by fire and radiation, a small, fluttering testament to human intention constrained by technological horror. Archival footage captures these fragments falling slowly over ruined streets, an almost surreal counterpoint to the destruction beneath. In their quiet descent, they remind us of the limits of foresight, the weight of fear, and the paradox of human survival in an age where knowledge and technology collided with devastating finality. The legacy of a leaflet is not simply the lives it may have saved, but the reflection it forces on humanity's capacity for both foresight and devastation, and the enduring moral questions that continue to echo over Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and the world itself.